Hello, this is Piero and Giorgio in beautiful, sunny as usual, and expensive London, central London, as you can see, in front of Westminster Abbey, the Parliament, and statue of one of England's greatest men, Winston Churchill. Of course, if you don't know me, I am the author of Survive the Economic Collapse, a best-selling book in France and out in England and the US. As the title of my book says, I talk about and I write about economic collapses. I will redo it again. I have done this video so many times in London. It was so noisy. I just have to do it again. So here am I at home, back from London. And as you may or may not know, I'm Piero San Giorgio. I am the author of the book Survive the Economic Collapse. And as the book says, I write about the causes and the consequences and how you survive a major economic collapse. So while I was in London and as I travel, I like to talk about the risks, the opportunities, the dangers, of course, of the places I'm in. And in that case, the other day was London. So you have to put this into context of the UK. The United Kingdom, former empire, well, still is somehow, former great industrial power, the first country to go through the Industrial Revolution in Europe, has completely deindustrialized. As you know, through the 60s and 70s, most of the industries have disappeared. And with the Thatcher Revolution, of course, it gained a lot of financial, economical strength, which, of course, costs a lot of jobs in manufacturing. And those jobs will never be able to be recovered. Now, of course, Britain's wealth in the third part of the sector of the economy, in the financial services, for example, IT, etc., has been, of course, welcome, but definitely makes it very fragile and weak to the global economy's potential collapse. Now, I'm not going to deal into why the economic collapse is going to happen. I think that if you read my book, you understand why. I'd like to cover a little bit of the problems that are going to touch a city like London. Now, think about, first of all, the impact of a global economy that eventually goes down because of too much debt or because of fundamental bottom-up effects, such as the lack of natural resources, which Britain in general will have less and less. Of course, the North Sea oil is going to be getting scarce, and so will the gas and natural gas, and of course, the lack of natural resources will impact the economy. Now, when an economy is purely based on the services sectors, such as the finance, insurances, well, how do you keep growing when there's not enough energy for all of that? And whilst with no production, with less fishing, less agriculture, especially in England, where the agricultural base throughout history has never been able to sustain more than a population that is equal to 1/3 of the one of France, for example. And now, of course, the population of Great Britain is about equal to the one of France. So there's going to be massive problems of supply, massive problems of food production, massive problems in energy production. That means electricity, that therefore transports, and therefore whatever is left of the economy will have to, at best, slow down further and further into a very lower level, or at worst, immediately collapse into basically a chaotic state of the economy. Now, through history, the British, and especially the English character, the people, were extremely resilient and of course, in a way, defiant towards adversity. And I think even the elites of the British system, the ruling classes, in a way had a lot of common bonds or links, and maybe sometimes these were made up, but at least the people, the common people, had the impression to be part of one kingdom, and for their land, for their country, and for their king or queen, they had this resilient, this strong character. And in some ways, there still is some of that. But when you look around in a noisy city like London, what you notice is that this is a globalized world, and you have in London, as you will have in Birmingham or in Leeds or in Liverpool, a mix of people from all over the world. And of course, there is a history of the British Empire's peoples moving into London and to the British cities, and today composing a substantial part of the British population. So these ethnical differences, these groups of people, while of course pretty well integrated because of the work and because of the low welfare state, the British welfare state is much smaller and lower than the one, for example, in France or in Germany. And therefore, you have to work, and because of work, you fit better into the economic society. And therefore, you feel a bit part of it, much more than if you're just on welfare and receiving money from the state. Now, still, if the town you live in is made of people who are just like you, whoever you are, you have a tendency when things go bad to stick together. However, when the city you live in is made of people from Pakistan, India, Jamaica, Nigeria, and of course some, I guess it's a minority now, some white people from England, eventually you start to group yourselves into communities. And while there may be some overlaps in some marriages, mixed marriages, eventually when things are good, it's okay, but when things tends to be tough, people become very hard against each other and may, first of all, blame each other for problems, but also may start to raid others for limited resources. And criminality, inter-ethnic or inter-community criminality, I think is going to be on the rise. As we've seen recently, for example, there were some Pakistani mafia, Pakistani mobs, who were putting into prostitution mostly white English teenagers. Because, of course, they were very poor, but also because they were lost, and because the police thought that to accuse Pakistani people would have been considered so racist that it would be worse than to actually go through the inquiry. So this is just an example of things starting to turn ugly. And I think Britain has been maybe 50 years ahead of other countries in terms of immigration, in terms of having vast amounts of people from all over the world to move into that land, and for economic reasons. And of course, has this process much more advanced than, say, for example, in France or Germany or other countries. So clearly that will have an impact. But overall, besides those important elements, the question is that, during World War II, during the Blitz in 1940, of course, when German bombers were raiding and bombing London or south of England, people had this will to fight on, because the lives were lives that were pretty tough. They were civilized, but of course, people were highly educated, in some ways more than now on average. But they had this strength, and the strength of character comes from, tough childhood, tough education, and a fairly tough and simple and maybe healthy life. What is life today? Look around in London. If you're wealthy, if you're a millionaire living in London, it's doable. If you make £1 million a year, that's okay. But really, frankly, if you make the average wage, it's an impossible city to live unless you resort to a very hectic, chaotic life with extremely bad quality food. There is great food in London. It's one of the best places in the world, best quality, imported from all over the world. But for most people, it's chips, it's fried, it's really bad food, and you can see from the people. The health in that country is really bad. Also, because of liberalization of the 80s, I think there's a lot of the poorer classes in the UK who not only have become unhealthy in terms of food, but also the cultural environment has dropped because TV programs became so low level, and all these reality shows, this consumerist approach to every aspect of life has turned a lot of the English population into consumers of bad food, bad TV programs, bad education, bad culture. And you see, I mean, England has rates of teenage pregnancies that have no comparison in the civilized world. I mean, you have to go in third world countries where you have teenage kids with babies on a rate as UK. And this is just a symptom of a big trend that probably started somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s, where there has been a drop in the level of literacy, in the level of education, in the level of culture. And of course, the poorer classes are hit the first. And well, of course, you don't see a lot of ethnic minorities, and you don't see a lot of teenage pregnant girls at Ascot horse races, right? So it is something of the lower classes. And as we know, the middle class is being squeezed, and it is pushed either for the upper part into the higher classes or pushed down and getting poorer. So that element of turning everyone into a consumer and not being a citizen anymore, I think explains that, in my theory, when things will start to really get bad, and they can become bad very, very fast, the reaction of people will be ugly. They will turn into communities, they will turn into racial groups and ethnic groups and ethnic communities, and most of it, they will not be resilient and defiant as they used to be. They will just turn into a gang of hooligans and plunder and go and look for resources everywhere, because there is not any more bond of that sticks people together. Now, one can hope that there is still the professional British Army, and in some ways the royal symbol that could keep some form of pride and order and push people to be in order. But I really believe that this mentality of the English and British people in general has nothing to do with the one that was around 70 or 80 years ago. Obviously, it has changed dramatically, completely. And I think for the worse. And therefore, the reaction of people to the drop of the supply chains, to the drop of maybe electricity and water, to the drop of food being imported from overseas, and therefore starvation. I mean, let's call it the way it is. I mean, without food being imported by planes and ships daily, the British Isles are going to starve. So the kind of economic collapse that I fear is going to happen will have profound consequences, and eventually violent consequences. So that brings another element, is that the British people, the people in England, have laws that are extremely limiting the ability to defend yourself with the proper tools, which are firearms. So one has to really think, besides hunting, which is also limited to a few people, and besides security and police and army personnel, who will be able to keep law and order? Will it be the mob, organized crime? Will it be ethnic communities that have black market weapons? This is a big question that, if you're a responsible citizen, if you're a father or mother of families, you really have to consider who is going to maintain order if the state fails. Who? And if the answer is no one, maybe it's time for you to start planning, to start training, to start organizing yourself, to be able to have the people, the organization, the supplies necessary to maintain order around your house, around your neighborhood, around your little town. And of course, in terms of supplies and production of food, well, at least here it starts to have good news, is that in the UK you have pioneers with programs such as the Transition Towns movement and other autonomy and self-sufficiency associations and initiatives around Britain and England. So there are a lot of those little towns who are starting to think post-carbon, after petrol, or how should we live without petrol, which basically means if there's a crisis and we don't have import of food which to be imported requires oil, Well, at least you can produce with gardens, home gardens, community gardens, and water collection and purification, self medicine, self production of medication, etc., and of course defense and the social link. And all these elements are what I talk about in the book. My book is a sort of blueprint on how you can organize small societies to survive chaos, which I believe, unfortunately, is going to happen pretty soon in the next decade. I think we're going to see the massive collapse of our system. So, London as a big city, so nice to be in quiet now and not having horns of police and the works in the streets and generally the traffic and the people. London is a big town. I mean, all this noise is because there are millions and millions and millions of people living in this urban area, and the traffic, the movements, it's considerable. How are those millions of people going to react if there's a major crisis? For food, for water, for order. This is going to be an incredible mess. Honestly, if you do live in London, if you can, it's a great city. I really like the center of London. It's really fantastic. But really, if you can afford to live around outside, please do. Because the center, I mean, and by the center, I really mean a lot of mileage of radius, because London is such a big city. You should really consider, if you read my book, how you could live, how you could work, being outside large urban areas, because clearly these are way too large to be self-sustainable and to be able to have any chance of survival, or very low chances of survival in the future. So really think about that. The other elements, of course, maybe I will do other videos on Wales, on places in Great Britain that have higher chances of success, such as the Cornwall region, or the Lake District up there, up north, or Scotland, which is really a great place. I mean, while there's Glasgow and Edinburgh are big cities, clearly you have a lot of better solutions living outside the big cities. But really, in England, the corridor, the Thames Valley, and then up to Birmingham, and then up north to Leeds, Liverpool, and so on, these areas are going to be in big trouble. Many big towns, a lot of people, and of course, especially London. This is going to be a disaster. And one really has to think forward. And I think, hopefully, I don't know if they think about that, but the government, whether it's the city or the national governments, really should have plans, contingency plans, to see how they can manage any crisis that could bring chaos, but also how they can manage a transition to a different kind of economy, and perhaps a different kind of population mindset, where one is less an individual. But of course, this seems to me very low probability that this can happen. It's way too complicated to set up. So if you're interested to know more and to think about how could you and your family make it despite the chaotic consequences of economic collapse, which I think is going to happen, and I explained that in the first part of my book, well, I encourage you to read it. I encourage you to read my book, Survive the Economic Collapse. You can find it on Amazon.com. I'm not sure you find it on Amazon.co.uk, but bear with us. Try to get it still. Or you can order it in a library, on a bookshop, I mean. Always library, bookshop in English. If you go to bookshop, ask Piero and Giorgio, Survive the Economic Collapse. They can order that for you, of course. Or otherwise, Amazon.com is easy. So really think for yourself, but also think about the consequences of chaotic economic situations, especially where you live in your geographic area, within the kind of neighborhood you're in and live in, and think about how you can organize a little bit your life to have a better life, but also a more sustainable, a more autonomous, and in the end, more freedom. So with that, I leave you with these thoughts, and next time I'm in London, we'll talk again. Take care. Tu vas lui mettre des sous dans la guitare? C'est pas grave. Tu lui mets là dans la guitare. Tu jettes? Ça? Elle a fait la dame, tu vois. Vas-y. Pas de problème. Pas peur. Allez. Tu donnes? Tiens, tu donnes ça? Non, non, donne-moi ta main. Tiens le sac alors.